Hello, everybody. I wanted to say a word about international law and how important it is for a few reasons. I think it's the context in which we should see the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. Israeli invasion of Iran, or not invasion, but attack on Iran. And I think it's underappreciated as a force in the world. And I think the American paradigm of interventionism and non-interventionism misses the point of international law and a rules-based world order. So let me start by going back to the Cold War, when a huge percentage of the world's population lived under the darkness of communist tyranny. And that was a real thing. You know, my parents barely escaped it, and it still casts a shadow over Eastern Europe. I don't think people can imagine how bad it really was and how awful it really was. Look into the Black Book of Communism if you just wanna like read about the scope and scale of the horrors. Or I don't think I have it on the shelf. Or read name escapes me. There was a book about a lot of the torture methods used by the Soviet secret police. Anyway, stuff of nightmares. So America was pretty good for all. Like, you don't throw out a justice system just because it makes mistakes once in a while. America was a pretty good leader of the free world, and it earned the title of leader of the free world. And I wish more Americans were proud of that. Leftists who sympathize with communism will try to disparage America's role, and all to the extent that the Russian agents influence dissenting groups like libertarianism. There are Russian agents everywhere. I know this. This is what I've written about for the last 10 years. Like, they're gonna try to make you hate America, but it's important to remember America guaranteed the rules-based world order. And it was no small thing. I think the younger generations think of the Cold War as the war that never happened, but that's not it. You know, I'm old enough and I joined the army like long ago enough that I intersected with people who remember, like, in Germany, like jumping into their tanks and waiting for the Soviet invasion, because on their side of the demarcation line, the Soviets all got into their tanks and the Americans would do the same, and they would have this, this standoff. Like, it was a big deal. It took a lot, and America kept a huge part of the world free. And they love American soldiers, or until recently loved American soldiers in places like Poland. I remember in the early 2000s, someone was telling me like, "Oh, you're an American soldier. Let me buy you a beer." Similar experience in Korea, because Koreans know if it weren't for the sacrifice of Americans, they might very well be living like North Koreans. So again, it's something that Americans should be proud of, and I wish more people talked about that. But I think so much media and textbooks and education is created to disparage this image of America. Anyway, so because America earned its position as the guarantor of the rules-based world order, I think Europe tolerated the Iraq War, even though it was created under very dubious circumstances. And America put in the time. President Bush put in the time to build a coalition, build a consensus, and Europe reluctantly joined it. Including Ukraine. I think about 20 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in the Iraq War. Ukraine is I talk about it a lot, so that's why I'm drawing that connection as well. Um, but the image started to erode, and I think even the dubious Iraq War indirectly contributed to Russia's invasions of Ukraine, because Russia's always looking to the West like their big brother, like, oh, this is what civilized countries do. This is what great powerful countries do. Well, we're a great powerful country, so we'll do the same thing. So they felt like once America invaded Iraq, they felt like they needed to do something similar, indirectly, but imitating a superpower is a huge part of Russia. If you look at it closely and long enough, you'll see how insecure they are and how so much of what they do is a brutal, barbaric imitation of something also being done in the West. Um, the Iran War, also unjustified. No effort put in to build a coalition. You have Trump's rhetoric on for both Russia and Iran. So Trump says Russia's not too bad. In the past, he's blamed the war more on Ukraine than on Russia. Ignores their overt aggression, ignores their war crimes, ignores their overt calls for genocide by some um, mouthpieces close to the Kremlin. So Europe's like, whoa, will you support NATO? Huge concern for Europe because Europe has stuck to this view that a rules based world order is what's important. They've had it. I think they've had it. With the Iran war, Spain said no to the use of their bases. Um, Switzerland said it's a war crime. All these countries, Germany, UK, Canada, said no, we're not going to come to the Gulf. Italy came out and said that the war is unjustified, and they've had it. And I don't think Americans appreciate this. The dialogue pushed by MAGA and Fox News, it's the wrong debate. They're having a debate about intervention versus non-intervention, where I think the important debate is international law or no international law. And Trump has brought to the presidency a very sort of transactional approach to everything, which seems to have suited him in his business career. So go after Greenland, no problem, you know. Make statements about taking over Greenland, like completely upsetting the trust that NATO had in the United States, the rest of NATO had in the United States. Not an issue for him. He just sees it very, very give and take without any sort of higher, like any foundational belief, which is what international law gives us. What are the consequences of this? Well, I think they're a lot bigger than Americans appreciate. You know, we get to export inflation all over the world with the dollar system, and I do not believe the channels that say that the dollar system is about to go out the door, but it's getting a step weaker. Um, yeah, it's weakening trust in the dollar, and it's weakening our ability to export inflation. And once we can't export inflation, the inflation either stays at home, so it's much more radical, or we default on the debt, which isn't going to happen. So they'll inflate their way out of the debt. Huge consequences there. Europe is also making really subtle moves which are flying under the radar after Trump's inability to condemn Russia, after his very bellicose statements towards NATO partners, his bellicose statements towards Greenland. Europe is making a lot of really quiet moves. They're like, you know, there's MasterCard and Visa, American companies. We need an alternative. They're not saying you got to get out. They're not saying we're done with MasterCard Visa. They're like, no, we'll make a European alternative just in case, because we don't want the U.S. to have that leverage over us. They're saying, hey, you know what? We rely too heavily on Microsoft, Azure, Amazon, web services. We need a European stack, and they're investing in building a European technology stack. And it's not even like a emotional reaction to Trump. Like it's a legal thing. By recently passed legislation, I think 2019, Microsoft and Amazon would be required to share European data with U.S. authorities, and that is a violation of European privacy laws, which are a lot stricter than American privacy laws. So there's this sort of like decoupling, and it's happening on a very foundational level. It's not too late. It's not the end of the world. I think America has the ability to change itself, and that's another thing that Americans should be really proud of. America reinvent itself. It's reinvented itself many times, and I think it will again. But I guess my 2 points: talk about international law, not just intervention, non-intervention, and appreciate America's historic position as a guardian of international law, and realize what it means to lose this status. Cheers.